Hey all, Eli from Elfbait here, and it's a little sooner than I had expected to get back to you guys. We were able to get a game in this last Monday. I thought it wasn't going to be till after the holiday, but it turns out we were able to sneak one in. So a few things a few new developments in this particular session, and then also I do want to apologize for the abrupt cut at the end of the last video. Something happened with my phone where the video just cut out and then I couldn't get it restored in a timely fashion. Everything's back up and running now. And so rather than add to the end of this video or go back into this at the launch, I'm going to do a separate video to discuss that topic I was getting into, which was kind of pacing and utilizing unforeseen events in your table time, in the logistics of your game, for opportunities in-game. All right, so to jump into the latest session of the Valmorgen's Ledger adventure that we've been running, last left our heroes at Coulter's Cove, where they had spent the night. We kind of flashed forward ahead, assuming that Alwin had managed to get back to some sort of safe accommodations after he was mugged in the nighttime streets of Coulter's Cove. Rumas, the fighter, had returned had set himself up in an inn. They had arranged for a meeting back at the harbor master's office the next morning if they didn't hear back from each other before then. We kind of pick up from there. Now, a bit of an addendum here. I have 2 new players in the game. Word spread through the office, and I managed to actually accumulate a couple more players from my work team. So it's turning into a bit of a work game. But so this part of the adventure is also where I have to I decided to integrate them in, and so you'll see them coming in here in a moment. So we started out with Alwin waking up in his inn. He actually had asked the innkeeper if there had been anybody who had come looking for him, and he described Rumas, and decided to have a little fun with this. And so I rolled a couple of times, and it turns out that that Rumas had come by looking for Alwin the night before, but they hadn't figured out they hadn't caught on that it was him, and so they didn't let Alwin know. So Alwin decides to take the morning to go ahead and try and replenish his arrow supply. He had expended quite a few arrows in taking out the bandit camp before they came back to Coulter's Cove, and so headed down to the waterfront where most of the artisans and stuff, the common artisans are, to a blacksmith shop to get some arrows. This is where he encountered Verithir, the high elf ranger, one of the new players' characters, who was also there to pick up an order of arrows. And so the two of them, 2 elves, greet each other and begin chatting in Elven, drawing a bit of attention by the passerbys. And at that point, Sven, the human fighter, also one of the new player characters, comes out from the back of the blacksmith shop. Now Sven is a human from the Northern Baronies, which are a part of the former High Kingdom of Erlith that did not repatriate after the fall of the Red King, and he has his family is downtrodden from those times and has been working kind of as an itinerant smith and has now come to Coulter's Cove. So this was my way of bringing the party together without having another chance meeting in an inn. It made sense. We actually worked out pretty well, and so they start chatting up, and as Sven is fulfilling their order, in the conversation topic turns to the Red Hand, basically what's been going on with the Red Hand. And so Verithir, who is an elven scout who has been sent out by the High Elf Kingdom to kind of just keep an eye on is kind of scouting out, outside of the Elven, the High Elf Kingdom, has been hearing about the Red Hand and their exploits as well. So the conversation is turning to the Red Hand, and they notice that some of the passersby have not continued to pass by. They've actually drawn a bit of a crowd, and this crowd seems to be a group of pretty rough men, and they notice that some of them have red markings on one of their hands, which is the signature of the Red Hand Bandit Brotherhood. They wear they either color the flesh of their hands, or they wear red gauntlets or a red ring or something that marks them as a member of the Brotherhood. So at this point, they're suddenly threatened. There's a fight. A fight breaks out. The bandits are doing okay. I mean, they're only armed with clubs. This is just a real group. I mean, this is just really just the scum of the scum of the Red Hand. Not much more than street toughs, and they're doing pretty well. Verithir is fighting with a short sword and doing quite well with it. Sven is not armored and does not have his weapons, but he does happen to have a blacksmith's hammer and is doing his best. Alwin, who for whatever reason likes to wander around in his chainmail and stuff, it's just his thing. He's got his warhammer, and they make pretty short work of the bandits. A couple of pretty brutal deaths. In fact, they managed to cut them down to only one man standing. He runs, and as he's running, he runs into Rumas, who has decided to head back down to the waterfront to keep his meeting with the Chartmaster. So Rumas dispatches him pretty quick using the Lesson Giver, which is his blunt scimitar. Basically fights the bandit to surrender. The bandit doesn't want to die. He doesn't end up having to beat him into unconsciousness. He just gives up. He's just seen 5 of his brotherhood beaten, and one particularly gruesome critical to a prone and trying to escape member of the Brotherhood, which left him just absolutely crushed with a gout of blood spewing from his mouth. Nice graphic details. So they turn the hand in for their bounty. Their introductions are made. Alwin introduces the new friends that he has. As they're doing this, Sven finds himself quite rapidly discharged from his duties as an apprentice smith by Brune, the smith who owns the shop, who is now raging in the background as his shop front has been wrecked by the fight. So without any better prospects, Sven decides to accompany them on their mission to try and recover Valmorgen's ledger. So we now have a party of 4. We have 2 fighters, a ranger, and a cleric, and they proceed to go about their day, get their stuff together. There's some time spent resting and recovering, because during the fight, Alwin had to use some of his spells and maxed out his spell slots for the day, but he had managed to heal Verithir and then also enhance the armor class of the unarmored blacksmith who had come to their aid when the Brotherhood had attacked them. So some good team play there. During this time of recovery, Rumas has his meeting with the Chartmaster. The Chartmaster has found a ship captain willing to take them out to White Crag Fortress, a crabber, so explains the arrangements, offers Rumas lunch. Elwin, the Chartmaster, is a genial fellow, kind of an effete fellow, very knowledgeable and bookish, and doesn't get a lot of company in his back office, so certainly appreciates the company. But Rumas passes. They have things to do. He's a busy man, and so they set out to get their stuff together. They finish their resting and everything, and at that point, they then head down to the waterfront, where they find they find the crabber and his son running it. They run a small skiff, and arrangements are made, and so they head out to White Crag. Along the way, there's discussion about what he knows about the crag. Certainly they had some information from other members of the fishing community in regard to what they know about the crag, and the general superstitions persist. But the crabber likes to throw his pots down in the rocks south of White Crag, and so he's pretty familiar with the area, and because most people don't go there, it's good grounds for him to go ahead and get some fishing in. So by the time they reach the crag, it's dusk. The sun is leaving. It's a good time to show up. The light is dark, or the light is starting to die out, and so they've got good cover. The crabber is cagey enough to approach through the rocks, so they can observe the fortress without making themselves too obvious. Along the way, they did ask what was in the water, and this came about because as they're making their perception checks to make sure that their approach remains undetected, or to at least see if there's any sign that they were noticed. I did say that the Verithir heard something breaking the surface of the water and submerging numerous times as they're moving along. So he started to inquire from the crabber what was in the water and what lived around there. And they learned that there are some giant. They looked into the water with some and realized that there were some large eels that were following the boat. A bit of panic for a moment, not panic, but a little concern with the party for the moment. And then they were told that these eels are nothing to worry about, really, that they just kind of follow along with the boat, hoping to steal the bait from the pots, and they normally would just eat the crabs themselves. And so these eels, you don't want to fall in the water with them, but it's definitely nothing that they were to worry about while they're in the skiff. So they continue to observe the fortress. They notice that there is light in some of the rooms of the main keep, the Bailey Fort, but the spire, which sits out on a jut of rock out farthest into the water from the Bailey Fort, is dark. So there doesn't appear to be any light coming from the windows in the old spire. They do also note that there is it seems to be a gap between the piece of rock that the spire rests on and the spike of rock that comes out from the mainland that the Bailey Keep, the Bailey Fort sits on. And so they decide that that's probably a good place to try and make their insertion. So at this point, they've decided that they're not just going to observe, that they're going to make a nighttime approach to the fort, that it's better to do so than to try and come out there in the day. So as they're approaching the fort, one of them takes notice, the party takes notice of what looks to be a portal and an open, looks like former doorway, just now an open portal, and a stone wharf at the sea level in the rock below the Bailey Fort. And so they kind of change tack and head in there. They make kind of a rough landing. There's no fittings to tie off on, so the crabber and his son are holding the boat steady. The party clambers over the jagged rock and barnacle covered stonework. Alwin slips and scrapes himself, takes a point of damage, but nothing horrible. I mean, first level of point of damage can be something. But so they progress on into the stone portal. It's slippery. There's driftwood here. Clearly, the sea has made its way into this room at some point or another. The ground is pitted, so this has been happening for some time now. And as they move down kind of a short hallway, about 10 feet wide, they're moving down in a 2x2 formation. With Verithir and Alwin at the front, because they have the dark vision, and then the two humans in the back with a torch ready. They start to hear a clicking and a clacking and kind of a hard clambering across the stonework up ahead. Verithir moves forward, and with his dark vision, he can see the far wall, so they know that the room is not too big, because he has dark vision out to 60 feet, being an elf. And occasionally, something large and chitinous is moving across his field of vision, back and forth, and he's able to identify at least two separate things moving in the darkness. Finding this out, Alwin decides to seize the initiative and steps forward into the room and fires off a spell, which I have to apologize, escapes me at this moment, but it's a damaging spell and manages to do some radiant damage to one of the crabs. They find out that there are giant crabs in the room. There are 3 of them. And so the spell hits, the crab takes the damage. It's momentarily stunned, but the other 2 crabs stop. They stop scampering around and rooting around for food, and then they turn and start clacking their pincers together with a loud snapping in kind of a threat posture. At this point, have everybody roll initiative, and the only one of the party manages to succeed with his initiative. Succeed in beating the crabs in initiative. So combat ensues. They're fighting back and forth. The crabs are holding their own. Sven is standing right there with Alwin in the door. Verithir and Rumas have moved off to the right. They had seen earlier that there's a door in the far wall, a door off to this way, and a doorway off directly to the right. So Rumas and Verithir have moved off to the right to the closest door, hoping perhaps to secure an exit route through the room if need be. The combat's going pretty well, and at one point one of the crabs manages to score a crit on Alwin. Damage roll is pretty substantial. It would have killed Alwin, or at least taken him down. It wouldn't have killed him, but it would have taken him down. But everybody's new, so I decided that when Sven remembered that his fighting style, he's a defensive fighter, that he could offer some protection to an adjacent friendly party member, or friendly to an adjacent person. I decided to allow them to retcon that, which then made that crab strike at disadvantage. So, of course, I rolled a natural 20 for the first 20. The chances of getting a natural 20 on the second d20 is slim. And so the crab, Craig goes from down, Craig's character, Alwin, goes from being down to not even hit. The roll was so bad it didn't even hit. I had to laugh. We all had a chuckle because, Craig, being new to the system, took him a second to realize. He literally exclaimed, it's like, what the hell just happened? And we explained, okay, cool. You went from being dead to not being affected at all. The crab missed you. So about 3 rounds of combat were through. They've been wounded. There are some injuries. All 3 of the crabs are dead, and there's a strong smell of ammonia in the room. They search through the wreckage here. I mean, there's plenty of washed up stuff in here. Old pieces of ship fittings and nets and stuff like that, and driftwood and seaweed and kelp. So besides the creeping smaller crabs and crustaceans that the giant crabs have been feeding on, they do accumulate about 25 gold worth of mixed coins, spread about. We had to stop at that point, so we, with the role play to get the rest of the party in, it did take us a bit to get through to that, but at that point we stopped and called it a night. I did. We've got experience, getting out. I think Alwin and Rumas are approaching 2nd level. Which is nice because they could use the boost, but they're in a dungeon, so they won't be able to level up until they get out of the dungeon. There is some concern as to what they will find further into in the keep. The crabs were a pretty substantial threat, or at least showed that they could have been. First time playing 5th edition with this campaign, and I have to say that I'm still kind of figuring out just how balanced the challenge rating system is for 5th edition. I feel that 3 giant crabs that are rated at 1/8 challenge rating shouldn't quite have posed as much of a threat as they did. On the other hand, there were some really lucky rolls. all told in that combat, there were a total of five crits rolled. One was done by, two of them were inflicted by the crabs. One was the one that was basically retconned when Sven remembered his defensive fighting style. But the other one was against Rumas. It was only a really bad damage roll that kept that from being as bad as it could have been. So, their 1/8 challenge rating, there were only 3 of them against 4 players. So it's technically an under strength encounter for that challenge, for the party's level. Technically at 1/8, 8 of them should pose a moderate challenge. But that's dice gaming. So I think it was a good session. I think it went really smoothly integrating the new party members in. The two new players seem to really enjoy it. They have played D&D before, but older editions. One of them hasn't played anything more recent than early 3rd edition, and one of them hasn't played since 2nd edition. I think it's as a DM, it's a positive sign that word has spread where people have wanted to join. They raced out and got copies of 5th edition players' handbooks, which is a good sign too. They're already talking about future characters and what kind of builds they want to do for their current characters. But back to the adventure here. They're legitimately on their way to the meat and potatoes of the adventure that I'd written for Valmorgen's Ledger. I'm usually kind of more of a wing it kind of DM. But for 5th edition, I felt that, at least for the first time out, to get a feel of it, it would probably go better if I had something written out. So I've got an adventure written out, and they have found one of the alternate routes to take on the adventure, which is in the map, and it's something that was written in, and something that I hoped might come about. I mean, a frontal assault is an option, and there's certainly other ways they could have gone into it depending on how creative they wanted to get as a party. But they are now in the under dungeon below. They're actually in the dungeon that's below White Crag Fortress, and they hopefully will have a fun time moving up through it. They're not so far into it that they can't backpedal and do a rest and plan more if they wanted to. But I don't feel that that's where they're at. I mean, they took some hits. They might have to do a short rest to burn some hit dice, or just move on and fight with what they have. It's going to be completely up to them. We do have a cleric in the party, who could, with a long rest, learn some healing magic and stuff. Could prepare some healing magic. He's a war priest, so it's not exactly his forte. But that said, there's also there are short rests and long rests they can do. But who wants to try and long rest in a dungeon? So we'll see how that goes. So that was session 3 of Valmorgen's Dungeon, or Valmorgen's Ledger, the dungeon I wrote for 5th edition. And it seems to be going well. My original 3rd player, my brother's character, has yet to appear, but he's got some stuff going on that's keeping him from really being able to jump in. So we may be going up to a party of 5. And at that point, we'll see where it goes. Right now, again, like I said, we're really fighter heavy. We've got a ranger and 2 dedicated fighters, and then a cleric who's a war priest. So we're not the most healy, spellcasty party that's out there. We do have a high elf in the party, which means that we have a little bit of extra cantrip support, because those high elves have some magic of their own, and with Alwin being a wood elf cleric, he's got a lot of good skill, a good weapon proficiency and stuff beyond where a priest character or a cleric character would normally be, so that's good. And Sven has his defensive fighting style, which will prove handy too if they think strategically. I mean, they're in a dungeon, so close quarters combat is where that really comes in handy, because it's a 5-foot range. And yes, it's a reaction or a bonus action move. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check the rules, but it's one more trick in their their collective book of strategy. They're really a high armor class party, so a lot of good stuff there too. And with Verithir and Rumas using finesse-based weapons, it means that they're actually able to hit while being very defensive hit pretty well while being really defensive characters, because they can apply that dexterity bonus to hit. So all in all, I'm still happy. Everybody's jazzed about going on with the adventure. Got some good background stuff coming off the players and their characters, which is gonna hopefully, and I'm going to say is going to, because I don't want to sound too wishy-washy, but it's giving me good fuel for future adventures and campaign development. So yeah, for being new system and a new world just kind of generated on the cuff, it's going well. But rather than babble on more about it, I will thank you all for reviewing again. If you have any comments, input, feedback, questions, just go ahead and put them down below. And I'll get back to them. I'm certainly not going to keep the channel. I do want to keep the channel based around the campaign, but I also want to make sure that I still have general hobby questions, and I'll certainly do a video based on what got caught off from the last one. So yeah, well, thanks for watching. You have a good one, and get out and game.